it's very attractive for people to talk about Trump attracting himself Latino voters because of the way he talked in 2016. So obviously it catches a lot of people by surprise. I think one of the big mistakes in this conversation is they're attributing sort of the Latino-ness of these voters as the reason that they went to Trump. And that's, of course, I think that the Trump campaign, for starters, understood very well that a lot of Latino voters are issue voters, like any other voter, of course. But there are issues that are very important to certain subsets of the Latino community. The evidence for this is very clear in South Florida, where Trump has talked a lot about socialism in Latin America. He's done it for 4 years. He's arguably done more on the issue than any previous president. There's, of course, a lot of criticism about what he's done, but the fact that he's focused on it, really laser focused on the Chavez and Maduro regimes in Cuba, in Venezuela and Cuba, is undeniable. And that speaks a lot to the voters in Miami. It just does. To Cubans, to Venezuelans, to the broader Latino community in Miami. What happened there? Actually, the Democrats who lost House seats there, Debbie Mucarcel Powell, she outran Biden, which is really to say that Trump outran Carlos Jimenez, who won that seat, because Trump is so closely associated with this issue. Now, there's one thing that's a little bit surprising for everyone, and it really is, and we need to talk to those voters to know what happened. South Texas, yes, and the Rio Grande Valley, yes, it is usually a bit more conservative. The three Latinos who represent the RGV are usually a lot more moderate Democrats than the caucus at large, and they always have been. This is no secret. But that this new turned out for Trump, it was a little bit surprising. But if you look at the broader picture throughout the country, you also see that Latinos really won this election for Biden. And it's very clear in these battleground states. In Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, I call them sort of 4% states, because that's about the proportion of the electorate that is Latino. And that electorate, that Latino electorate in those states, while it's small, it went very heavily for Biden. And those states had razor thin margins. So you can say, without that Latino vote in those states, Biden would not have won this election. For the general Latino electorate, it was coronavirus and the economy. Latino voters are disproportionately affected by a lot of the issues that affect all voters. How so? In terms of the economy, because of the wealth gap, because Latino families have, for historical circumstances, amassed less wealth, they're more interested in a growing economy. They're more interested in being able to start a business or keep their job and just have income rolling in. Then healthcare also disproportionately affects Latinos. I think you can't really say there's a group of American voters that cares more about healthcare than another, because it's such a core issue in the country's politics. But again, it affects Latinos in such a way that they vote on the issue more. An issue that overranks among Latinos, and it's often forgotten, is the environment. A lot of Latinos live in Florida. A lot of Latinos live in California, where for either fire or water, that you've seen how climate change affects the places they live in. But also a lot of Latinos live in cheaper parts of cities, or less expensive parts of cities, and those parts tend to be closer to industrial areas, tend to have more pollution. So Latinos see their kids growing up with higher rates of asthma. So there you have tying up the healthcare element and the environment. But there are other issues. As we mentioned, the South Florida connection to Latin America, and especially to the Caribbean and South America, make it so that socialism in Latin America, absolutist regimes in Latin America, are an issue that can sway a voter. When a voter is maybe undecided, they're with the Democrats on social issues, they like the Republicans a little bit more on the economy, but then you come in and say, President Trump has opposed Maduro in Venezuela more than any other president. that might be the issue that makes a voter flip. In South Texas, there are more religious conservative Latinos than in other parts of the country, than in California, for instance. So you'll see more Latinos voting on these social religious issues, primarily abortion, because that is the social issue that where Catholicism and evangelical Christians really agree on. There are some where Catholics tend to be a little bit more liberal than evangelicals, but abortion is an issue where Republicans can have a lot of success talking to very Catholic Latinos, and of course to the evangelical Latinos that are many in number. So it's a little bit across the board. A lot of issues affect Latinos, but there's issues that affect pockets of Latinos in a way that can be perfectly targeted. And in some places, the Republicans targeted those, I wouldn't call them micro issues, but micro targeted those very important issues. And in some other places, the Democrats micro targeted their own very important issues, and they won different bits and pieces of the Latino electorate. I think continuous focus on smaller Latino communities in battleground states, I think that is undercovered. I think those are the subgroups that really flip an election, because we know half the Latinos in this country live in California and Texas. We know where California is politically. We know that population has made Texas a little bit closer to a battleground. It's not quite there yet. It's not certain that it will get there yet, ever, but we do know that Democrats have to invest more in Texas if they want to have a shot. But, Arizona, in the middle of those two, you do see that the Latino electorate turned out and helped among other demographic changes in the state, and this is very important, to help flip Arizona in the same way that Nevada was flipped in the last election. So what does that mean? I think we have to look very closely at how growth in the Latino population and growth in Latino participation commingles with other demographic changes to create political changes. Arizona is a perfect example, Colorado as well, Georgia, although of course commingling there with the existing very large African American community, with the suburban white community, but there is an element of Latino voters in Georgia, and just look at these behaviors, because campaigns, the one change that I think is important, after every single one of the last 5 elections, everybody was talking about where are Latino voters. There were a lot of answers to that, most of them unsatisfactory, but now we're talking about how Latino voters behave and how campaigns can reach out to Latino voters. I think this is a huge change for representation in the Latino community. It's sort of being taken seriously as voters, rather than as this monolith that doesn't participate. It's really it's a step forward, not only in the maturity of the Latino electorate, but in the maturity of politicians approaching that electorate, which arguably can be said to be more important.